Doctors of Reddit, what is the funniest thing you've heard someone say while under the effects of anesthesia? Story 1 told this story before, but surgeon here was doing varicose vein surgery on a very posh middle-aged lady, very cut-class accent. There was an anesthetic that we used that sometimes induced some hallucinations, either going under or coming out of anesthesia, and heard some funny things. Anyway, this lady was in recovery, just coming out of the anesthetic. The team were around waiting for her to wake up and gag a little on the tube in her throat for breathing, so we knew it was time to remove it. She gagged, we removed the tube, she smacked her lips and said loudly, in her incredible accent, "That's the best bit of I have had in years." The whole recovery room just fell about laughing. Luckily she didn't remember it. Edit okay, cut glass. Typo edit 2. Thank you for the gold, kind stranger, my first. Story 2 on the other side, when I got my tonsils removed, the doctor said we call this Jackson juice, as he hooked up the anesthesia to the fore, because this is what Michael Jackson killed himself with. I then woke up with no tonsils. Story 3 I had a lump removed from a few years ago. The table they had me on was shaped like a T, so my arms were outstretched. As I was passing out, I said to the nurses, "I feel like Jesus." They had to tell me about it when I awoke. Story 4 I took care of an 11-year-old boy in the ER a little while back. I gave him ketamine for a fracture reduction, or in other words setting and splinting of a broken bone. As he was coming around, he started with typical stream of consciousness babbling, and then he seemed to snap awake to say, "I'm gonna do so many drugs when I get older," to the amusement of his parents. They thought it was funny and cute, but I'm pretty sure I created a monster. Story 5 I got my wisdom teeth out too, had in 4 for the first time. I was 16 years old. All I remember was feeling great. I mean seriously amazing. When I sorta came to, I remember asking how much longer till it's over, and they said we're done. The nurse brought me out to the car with my parents, and helped me out to the car. And on the car ride home I asked why the nurse was so friendly. My parents told me that I confessed my love for short-haired brunettes, and that she would be my wife because she was perfect and I loved her. Haha, I had no game at the time. Story 6 while having dental work done under the influence of laughing gas, I, female mid-teens at the time, tried very hard to flirt with the also female married dentist. I was not in any way subtle, she was not at all amused, awkward. Also, not anesthesia but dilaudid. I called my husband from the ER once rambling about how totally amazing it was that we have fingers. They're so helpful, and they're like always there, they're like little friends that you get to carry around with you everywhere. It didn't take him too long to figure out they had me high as a kite, but he was super confused at first. Story 7 as I was passing out to get my wisdom teeth done, the nurse who was putting me out said something about "You may feel an itching or burning in your genitals, please resist the urge to scratch it," and I answered with "No problem. You can take care of my genitals for me," and she answered with "Maybe I should make it so you don't wake up," as my eyes closed, and that's the last thing I remembered. I'm sure the next hour or two was terrifying as I contemplated whether Shed killed me and if I deserved to die. Story 8 my boyfriend, as he was being wheeled into recovery, yelled to me, "Honey, you can call me Shrek from now on." He has no idea why he wanted me to call him Shrek. I had to have surgery a few months later, and when I had woken up, I called my boyfriend on the hospital phone and told him he could call me Fiona from now on. Story 9 when I woke from having my wisdom teeth removed, I asked the nurse to take me to the beach and release me back into the ocean so I could be with my people. She kept refusing, so I started accusing her of fiddling with me whilst I was asleep. I ended up getting moved to a different recovery area, where I was then asked to be quiet because I thought I was listening to Nicki Minaj, but in fact it was just me slaughtering the lyrics to an imaginary beat. Story 10 we had the same family doctor for over 45 years. He actually delivered me, some 60-odd years ago, when I was a middle-aged man myself. During my very last checkup before he was to retire, he invited me into his private office, where he took half an hour to reminisce and laugh with me about a bunch of family stuff. He informed me that I had actually been one of his very first solo deliveries as a young attending, and that he had been a little nervous on my mom's behalf. He reminded me that by all indications, I has promised to be a rather tricky delivery. I was a week overdue, I was her first pregnancy, I was a pretty large baby, 9.5 pounds, that mom was a very tiny woman, and that she had already been in labor with me for more than 24 hours. He told me he had been about to suggest to mom that a cesarean might be in order, when I suddenly decided it was time to bust a move. Mom had had a funny reaction to her epidural, and between that and sheer exhaustion from her lengthy labor, the doc could tell that she was fading in and out of lucidity during my actual delivery, which took a while even after I had become motivated. And in addition to all the other complications, early in the process the doctor had also needed to digitally coax me into the perfect position to make my grand entrance. Lucid or not, mom certainly remembered that part of the procedure. Because according to the doctor, just after head cut my cord, and before she had fully come round again, my dishcloth limp, sweat-drenched, exhausted mother, normally a very gentle, unaggressive and soft-spoken woman, had suddenly grabbed him by his upper arm with a grip of steel, heaved herself halfway off the table, locked eyes with him from about 6 inches away, and yelled, "Did you at least take your shoes off before you walked in?" Then her eyes had rolled back in their sockets, and Shed flopped back onto the delivery table, out like a light for the next 10 minutes. Doc chuckled that the mat nurse had had to leave the delivery room for a bit at that point, because Shed peed herself a little, so he ended up washing me off and wrapping me up in a receiving blanket himself. To the end of her days, Mom's steadfast claim was that she has absolutely no recollection of ever saying anything like that to him, and was horrified by the possibility that she had. Nonetheless, Doc told me that this was that incident that had made Mom and me two of his very favorite patients. Story 11. I had jaw surgery last year and started to get really scared as I sat in my hospital bed waiting to be wheeled into surgery. My mom was with me and I told her how much I wished my dog was there because snuggling her always makes me feel better. I guess having my dog on my mind turned into some weird thoughts once they gave me drugs because apparently I started crying out of the fear that they were going to give me dog teeth. Edit. I thought I'd show you the dog in question. All of our respective teeth are safely in our own mouths. Story 12. After I got my teeth removed and woke up I had an uncontrollable urge to drive. I had recently got my permit. I was like, let me drive, I want to go. My mom had to physically restrain me by putting her forearm against my throat against a wall. The nurse also had to help restrain me. I cooled down after like 5 minutes of this. Story 13. Not a doctor, but my dad had been given the goofy juice and was about to be wheeled into surgery. He looks at the anesthesiologist and asks, will the nurses have big titties? My mom and his mom were in the room, laughing hysterically. The anesthesiologist chuckled and said, okay, yeah, you're ready for surgery. Story 14. My mom has a sort of cute one. After a recent surgery she woke up crying and asking for my dad, 31 years of marriage and still stupid in love with each other. Story 15. Not a doctor, but my girlfriend broke her ankle pretty badly in April. I showed up in the ER shortly after she'd arrived, and had to step out briefly so that the nurses could set the bones back. They had to give her something pretty intense for the pain. Believe it was ketamine. I came back in after it was done, and hilarity ensued. She forgot repeatedly that she'd even broken her ankle. She constantly worried that she was swearing too much. There was a little boy in the next bed, which she was not. She thought that reality had broken and that there were 8 universes all at once. Edit. Thus comment made it to a list on Knowable D. Story 16. Not a DR, but a roller derby girl who witnessed teammate break their leg. When the paramedics gave her the whistle of pain relief, she went from screaming in pain to saying, I hope that cute paramedic has to cut off my pants cause he might like what he sees, made more hilarious by the fact she is married. ECT. Story 17. Looks like I'm the only doctor who has responded to this so far. For general anesthesia and even conscious sedation, people don't usually say funny things. Most people's funny comment stories are from being on pain medications, which is analgesia, not anesthesia. I literally sedate people all the time and they just pass out. Now, people with hospital delirium. Those stories are funny. Story 18. Not a doctor but an EMT. When I was doing my clinical rotations there was a lady who was in a room yelling about how she knows who she is. She stated her full name, age, height, weight, where she was and why. I thought she was completely lucid until she started shouting, I ain't no prostitute, but can I sell this pussy? There was another guy that also seemed pretty lucid in the emergency room, but then he said, can someone tell me why the guy next to me is pregnant? Ideas freaking me out. Story 19. I recently had to have a tooth removed and while under laughing gas, after however long of them scraping against my teeth, I declared that I knew how they came up with dubstep music. The nurse pulled out of my mouth and asked what I had said. I responded with, you know dubstep music is right, and she laughed and nodded. Whoever made it must have made it after having a tooth pulled and hearing the wiki wiki buea. She literally had to stop working because she laughed so hard. Story 20. I sang You Are My Sunshine at the top of my lungs while being wheeled into the recovery room after my knee surgery. My dad, along with my now ex-husband, could hear me clear across the other end of the hallway, even through the snickers and giggles of the nurses. The surgeon still calls me Sunshine when we see each other around town. Story 21. I recently got surgery on my foot and while I was still high my mother recorded me saying things like, where's my foot, Mom? The communist took my foot. Where's my foot? All I have is a snub. Those communists took my foot and left me with a snub. I got pissed because they didn't have Coke but Dad Pepsi. Who the drinks Pepsi. Called the nurse Samantha. Her name was Brittany. Yelled at nobody. Named Susan. Claimed to have 9 children. Apollo and Dante being my favorite 2, and Susan being my least favorite child who I have locked in the basement. We don't have a basement. Cried because I had to pee and sang a parody version of Set Me Free from the TV show The Get Down called Let Me Pee. Cried because I wanted chicken nuggets. When asked how I was going to eat them because I was high I said something about ripping them up into pieces and putting them in a bowl of honey mustard, then I'll eat it like soup. Obligatory. Not a doctor, but when my friend woke up from general anesthesia after his kidney stone removal surgery he turned to the anesthesiologist, locked eyes and dead straight mumbled, did you break my dongus? The poor guy has to excuse himself from the room. He was laughing so hard, never came back. Story 22. I recently had open heart surgery. When you wake up they give you a heart-shaped pillow to hold on to and put pressure on your chest, which feels amazing. When I woke up I threw the pillow at my mom and told her that whoever came up with that idea was the most ridiculous person and screaming that no one wants something on their chest after it's been broken. That pillow ended up being my favorite thing and I kept it with me 24/7 for a couple of weeks. Story 23. Not me but my friend got knocked unconscious and hurt her neck so they gave her some pain medications. When they took her for a CT she was asking why and the nurse told her they had to take a picture of her brain and she asked if she should smile. Story 24. Not a doctor but my best friend broke his collarbone and here is a list of the best things he said. We walk into the emergency room and he is saying hello to everyone, then he sees this nurse and blurts out, "Wow, you are very attractive." Anytime we were alone together he would whisper more of a yell than a whisper to me about how much he wanted to this girl he had a crush on. "Do you think lunchboxes are sad when they are empty? Shit man, I'm so horny." The ambulance driver was sitting right next to him when he said this. "I love my grandmother so much, she is so lovely. Have you met her? Wow, she is great." He was talking to a nurse, not me. Story 25, not a doctor. But I kept asking if this was the stuff, followed by, "Oh yeah, this is the stuff." The stuff was what they give you before anesthesia. When they brought me in the OR and went to put the mask on me, I pushed them away and asked, "Is this the stuff that puts me to sleep?" They said no, but proceeded to put the mask on, and my last words to them were, in a giggly voice, "Okay, bye." Edit. Oh yeah, I also was screaming the whole time under the stuff. Please don't let me say anything stupid. I'm sure I followed that with more stupid. Story 26, my girlfriend after wisdom teeth removal. Do you think they call it sand because it's between the sea and the land? God love her, she was a riot the whole way home. Story 27, my friend's sister was slowly waking up after surgery and was still a bit out of it from the meds. Her family came into the room and asked how she was feeling, and her response was, "I feel fine, but man, that nurse is as the nurse was standing next to her. Luckily the nurse was able to laugh about it with them. Story 28, underwent a procedure that required sedation with ketamine. I screamed for half an hour in the post-op area. I scared the patients and fought off the staff, little 5-foot-tall me. When I stopped tripping, the staff told me that they had to use enough sedatives and dilaudid to take down a grown man 3 times my size. Story 29, I had surgery for endometriosis. Sucked, but it is what it is. So there I am, just coming out of the anesthesia, and my hands are just going everywhere, like they have a mind of their own. I was rubbing my face and mumbling, and then I felt an itch by my pubic area, so naturally I tried to scratch it. I then realized that they shaved my pubes. I began crying and moaning about how my pubes were gone, that it was going to take forever to grow them back, and that I really missed them. At one point I believe I was sobbing that they needed to put them back on me. I'm really fun after surgeries and epidurals. Story 30, apparently when I was getting my septum fixed, I yelled at the doctor for lying to me about how the stuff prior to the anesthesia would taste. That was not a banana. "You liar, have you eaten a banana before?" Then post-surgery I reportedly burst into tears over a particularly heartwarming episode of In the Night Garden because the Tumlabas couldn't find their toothbrushes. My dad thought this was all great fun, finally was abandoned by family, at which point I asked some poor nurse to give me my phone, and everyone in my recent contacts list got selfies, focused on my nose, followed by messages about how these drugs were funny. I was 21. Story 31, was getting tonsils removed I think, and put under anesthesia, and the dentist was wearing one of those colorful shirts with butterflies on it. I apparently was super into those butterflies and poked her breasts the entire operation saying, "What pretty butterflies." Somehow, mom was semi-impressed. Story 32, I am mostly not doctors, but who am I to be left behind by the bandwagon? When I got my wisdom teeth out, the only thing I recall was trying to signal to the nurse to use the saliva suction thing, but since I was drugged up and my mouth was full of surgical tools, I decided to sign language fingerspell the closest word I could think of, which was vacuum, over and over. I spelled it wrong. Story 33, after I got my wisdom teeth out, I lined up all the health food cereal and knocked it onto the floor while crying out, "This is food." When I woke up from surgery, I was hitting on all the nurses, young, old, man, woman, didn't matter, everyone got called beautiful that day. Story 34, finally, my time to shine. When I was 13 I was in ICU for a long time and was just coming out of a coma when this occurred. For reference, I was just about the shyest kid you'd ever meet. Obviously I don't remember this, but it's been confirmed by my mother and plenty of nurses that at one point, not long after waking up from my coma, I sat straight up, looked my nurse in the eye and said, "Hey you, I'm gonna your boyfriend later." Also should be noted I'm a lesbian. Story 35, I do some weird under anesthesia. After having my wisdom teeth removed I remember the nurse saying that I would remember that part. It became my only mission in life to remember that part. I really hate being told what I can and cannot do. After having my arm set after I broke it they gave me ketamine. I actually really liked the process at first. My arm felt really warm and I was definitely tripping. I think my eyes were open the whole time and I was looking at the ceiling light. I told my wife that I loved her about 100 times, and then as I was processing what was going on I started saying that everything was crunchy and mechanical. Last, after being put under for brain surgery, I woke up in a really pissed off mood. I do not remember this part. Anyway, I was pissed that the nurses wouldn't give me ice chips. I was really thirsty. My throat was dry and these highly trained medical professionals had the audacity to not give me crunched ice. Story 36, not a doctor but recently had surgery because my ovary was in the wrong place as well, a bunch of endometriosis. I barely remember going into the operating room because when they were prepping me they gave me something to calm down. As soon as I woke up I straight off asked to see my so, they wouldn't let him in. So then whenever I saw a nurse I kept asking them to thank doctors for me. I just really wanted the doctors to know how much I appreciated their effort, and that seemed so darn important at the time. Story 37, obligatory, not a doctor, but a few years ago before my hip surgery, the nurses were wheeling me back to the OR when I remembered my purse was underneath the bed. They handed it off to my dad and I, while under whatever loopy meds they put in my four prior to full sedation, made a joke about how the purse matched his outfit. One of the nurses made a reference to The Hangover, and I followed with, "It's not a purse, it's a satchel, Indiana Jones has one." They all started hysterically laughing, which of course set me off too. It's a joke I still would have made sober, but seemed funnier since I was high as a kite at the moment. Story 38. I had a surgery a few months back, and my mum said that when I was being wheeled to the recovery room I kept shouting marijuana is the spice of life at everyone. Story 39. Not a doctor, but I sprained my knee a few weeks back. I ignored it because my knees have always been shitty and I thought it was just a particularly bad 24 hours, but once it swelled to twice the size, causing the kneecap to press down a nerve and create the weirdest, most awful feeling spasms. I rushed to the ER. I took a muscle relaxer, but I don't even think it was just that. I think my anxiety from the pain shot through the roof and I dissociated, a side effect of anxiety where your brain is like, holy, I can't handle this anymore, and basically detaches you from reality to a certain extent and dumps feel-good neurotransmitters into your blood. So that plus the muscle relaxer placed me in something similar to an opiate high. The doctors and nurses kept asking me what did you take because it seemed like I was up on something like Oxy, and I'd just slur mumble. I told you a Scalaxin. Stop after my x-rays. I just lay in bed, watching Antique Roadshow, and proceeded to tell the nurse every thought that popped into my head about the items on screen. Is that 18th century? Probably 18th century, yeah, Georgian or Rococo, right? I don't really know the difference, one's French, one's British. Okay, I do know the difference, I guess, but not really. It's so charming, what does it cost? Tell me. She was just like, okay honey, okay. Story 40. I got my appendix taken out, and the doctor told me to say goodbye to my wife before the surgery. She said I love you. I said I know. She did not find it that funny. The doctor chuckled though. Story 41. When I got my tonsils removed, I woke up from my anesthesia in the general post-op area. It took me a while to wake up, but when I did, from some reason just started yelling I am alive, and want hash browns and not stopping. I had to get out into a private room because other patients and families were getting worried about a patient yelling I am alive, with bits of who has hash browns. I eventually started pronouncing hash browns into hashabriones. The nurses were trying to keep me from yelling because I just got my tonsils removed and said I would be in a lot more pain if I did not stop yelling. This made me yell more. They were both concerned but also laughing so hard they had to leave the room. From what my boyfriend told me, I was in so much pain when the drugs wore off. LPT. Do not yell after tonsillectomy. TLDR. After tonsil surgery, screamed I am alive and want hash browns. Had to be wheeled to private post-op room because I was scaring patients and families. When I got appendicitis, they gave me Dilaudid because it felt like someone was trying to burn a sharp bulb out of my lower stomach. I remember going from screaming crying from the pain to telling my boyfriend I feel like I am being hugged by a cloud, which is what I thought I said, but in reality he said I just murmured cloud hugs. He did a WDF face and then said I starting swaying side to side with my arms crossed saying cloud hugs and humming. TLDR. Got appendicitis, while on Dilaudid, tried to tell my boyfriend I feel like I am being hugged by a cloud, but in reality had my arms crossed while swaying said cloud hugs. Story 42. Under the effects of Dilaudid, I told my doctor I pooped 32 times a day. She then said I looked terribly well for a man who shits his own weight every 8 days. I have no idea what I thought she said, but she got a kick out of the answer. She told the wife that she loved asking people questions who the ER had stoned into oblivion. Story 43. Had my gallbladder removed. Pre-surgery. I'm a nervous wreck. I just could not stop talking. I explained in detail about how I'm bad with pain and will possibly need more pain meds as a result, however, acknowledged that I have no professional training and would trust their judgments. They'd given me something to prevent blood clots and something else. Turns out that something else was something to help me relax, and it turned me into a chatterbox. When I had 2 molars removed, the first one shattered or something, and a specialist had to be called in. I was high as a kite and he's introduced himself as Dr. Jesse whatever. I've internalized my hello, pleasure to meet you and verbalized haha science. Instead of doing things the other way around. I also remember being really proud of myself for breathing, because I was told for over an hour, while high, that I was doing a good job of breathing. Story 44. Not a DR, but I woke up in recovery because someone was moaning me a DR, was bent over the patient next to me. I was patting his saying it's okay you're waking up it's okay shhhh. Story 45. I had an abdominal surgery, and as soon as I woke up the doctor was in showing me pictures of my insides and talking to me. As most of you know, the first time you wake up is not the only time. Every time I woke up I asked to see the pictures. Finally at about the 8th time I asked my mom if the doctor had been in, and she let me know she was counting how often I wanted to see them. Not very exciting, but just a constant is it done. Let me see. After I had my wisdom teeth out I asked if I could paint butterflies on the mailbox. I don't know why. Story 46. I got my wisdom teeth out when I was 21 and was terrified because I had never gone under before for anything. Friendly nurse puts the 4 in and pretty much immediately am out. When I fully came to I had a fuzzy memory of being wheeled out to my GFS car, and I was told I had been Snapchatting in the office and in the car and sending photos of me posing while drugged out of my mind to all my friends. They got a good laugh out of it, huh? Bonus warm fuzzies. Me and my GF had broken up but were still friends, and she told me months earlier she would take care of me as I recovered. She kept her word, and for some reason while taking care of a bleeding, drugged out idiot, decided she wanted to be with me after all. It's been about 3-5 years now and I love her immensely. Story 47. This is secondhand, as I have no memory of any of it. I was out of surgery and doped up on God only knows what while, so I'm told, demanding that the doctor promise me he wouldn't go to law school because then we could be didn't go to law school buddies. I had been practicing for 2 years. Story 48. Sorry, not a doctor. But this was shortly after I got my wisdom teeth out. I was apparently fine, at home going to get in bed, and I called my then boyfriend in a panic because there was a small town on my blanket and I didn't want to crush it. Story 49. Like most, not a doctor, but when I was given something right before I was wheeled in for a colonoscopy and upper GI scope, I loudly through the hall with patience, told the nurse to warn the doctor that the internet had led me to believe my butthole was slightly higher than normal, and I was concerned he would get lost. I was heavily mocked after the procedure, and totally deserved every moment of it. Story 50. This happened to me a few years ago and my twin sister will never let me live it down. I had just been put under for getting my wisdom teeth extracted. Apparently, when I woke up, I told the cab driver on the way home that we had to go to a pet store, and no exceptions, my twin and taxi driver were so intrigued that they just let me do this. When we arrived at the pet store, I opened the door and ran to the chinchillas. I spent the next 20 minutes or so petting and whispering to the chinchillas like a club kid on an ecstasy cocktail. Then my sister dragged me out. Taxi driver had turned off the meter and was laughing in the pet store with my sister, watching me, and she had the taxi guy drive us home. Story 51. There was that one viral video where the white female teenager was ranting to her mom about how she wanted some surgical dental assistant. I see people come out of anesthesia 10 times a day. Honestly, most people bawl hysterically, or a high confusion. These are about the only emotions I'll consider 100 legit. Usually I think as a result from the ketamine and propo, or they try to talk and it's a horrible mix of confusing gauze talk. Most often the first words are was that it, am I done? Very rarely we get a funny one that is usually holding hands with a wife or girlfriend and still flirting with the staff. Honestly, most people who have crazy stories I think, seem to have a placebo effect I think, and they play it up pretty hard, knowing they are high. Very rarely do I buy the hilarious stories that happen out of anesthesia, but there are 10 odd news stories a day from the strange things people do. I guess just working with it, it's hard to buy into the drama all the time. I think the drugs just remove the filters. It's rarely funny or pretty, usually pretty embarrassing for their family. With the disclaimer, my favorite story was a young teen and after getting wisdom teeth removed, was dead set on calling a boy she liked and asking him to marry her. We tried to stop her but she put him on and was declaring her undying love. Not that I think he understood much because her mouth was filled with gauze, pretty funny to listen in. Second favorite story was a guy about 64, 250 pounds. Decides he wants to walk around, gets himself up still attached to monitors and strapped to the chair. The second he stood up we rushed to catch him, realizing his size. Instead, we all at once backed up and he face planted to the ground. We couldn't even lift him off the floor so we got him a pillow and let him sleep it off. He woke up and we told him, and he was like, oh my bad, sorry. Moral of the story, don't be an asshat and listen to your medical staff. Story 52. Had an operation on my nose. Woke up post-surgery high as a kite. As the nurse talked me into consciousness I proceeded to tell her how I am planning to propose to my boyfriend. The first I had heard of this, she kindly told me how sweet I was, at which point I began to hit on her by telling her how stunningly beautiful she was in gay. Story 53. In boot camp I had all 4 of my wisdom teeth pulled, shattered and picked out. I was awake, local anesthesia only, and I didn't feel a thing, but the pain medication they gave me had me doing like pretending to be Chancellor Palpatine. I would just say do it over and over. I'd switch it up sometimes with I can feel your anger. Give in to the dark side. Because of the sore throat I sounded pretty spot on too. Fun times. Story 54. 100. True story, and I can handle my drugs pretty well. Anesthesiologist, you might feel a slight tingling in your fingers. Me ugh, I can't even feel my face. Anesthesiologist, oh. Story 55. Well, I'm not a doctor, but the patient in question, I was 14 and having a lumbar puncture on Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas to me. Anyway, they decided to let the trainee do it and he missed 3 times and I was in absolute agony and my mum hit the roof and demanded a better doctor do it and to give me some sort or pain relief. I don't know if it was morphine or an anesthetic or what, but I was out of it and mumbling all sorts of, but when I eventually came round to my teenage groggy state the first thing I did was sit up, see a nurse walk past the room no more than 5 feet away and screamed at her, oh, can I get some of this to take home? It's brilliant. Needless to say, everyone thought it was hilarious and I just flopped back down and fell straight back to sleep. Story 56. I had surgery for a hernia when I was 14. The nurse was ridiculously attractive apparently. I don't remember even going to the hospital, but I have the scar for proof, and my mom's story, every family reunion I hit on her like I was a 30 years private eye tired of life in the 1950s and talked like just straight bullshit about my mother who was right there to the less attractive nurses the entire time I woke up until I left the hospital, switching personalities every time the hot nurse came in. Story 57. I was in recovery after having surgery on my broken leg and ankle. I was coming to and heard my dad's voice and the nurse said, oh, about 5:30 p.m. he's coming around now, and my dad cracked a dad joke about my sleeping habits and how that's normal. Not skipping a beat I half yell from my bed, you dad. While giving him the finger, the nurses on the ward were all rolling in laughter saying that was the best wake up ever. Story 58. So this was a number of years ago, but my dad fell and broke both bones in his arm wrist. My mom takes him to the ER and they give them pain meds to set the bone. Once he has the cast on he turns and asks the doctor, will I be able to play the piano? The doctor is like, yeah, assuming everything heals properly you should have no problem playing. My mom turns to my dad and says, what in the world are you talking about? You've never known how to play the piano. Story 59. Obligatory, not a doctor, But this happened when I was getting my wisdom teeth removed. I don't at all remember saying this, but apparently I kept calling the dentist by his first name and I invited him to a party. Story 60. My father had to have his pancreas taken out, and while I was not there for the anesthesia, I was there for the morphine-induced coma that happened for the next 24 hours. Mostly he slept, but every now and then he would say something in his sleep or wake up for a brief moment and say something. These are some of my favorites. Jim Shoulder invented shoulder pads. Did you see that guy jump? He got up like 15 feet. I can't believe he's white. Design me a bridge. It has to be 24 feet long by 2 feet wide. She shaved me. It was kinky. And my personal favorite, when we suddenly woke up, looked at me with surprise in his eyes and said, Taylor Swift is gay, hands down the funniest thing I've ever witnessed.